The smell of burning fungal spores still fills my nostrils from the day I watched Warboss Grakka die laughing. My name is Mek Grotnik, former assistant to the legendary Mad Dok Grotsnik of the Blood Axes, and I've spent 40 years studying something no human scholar ever could. What goes on in an orc's brain when the light leaves his eyes? I've dissected 1,700 orc corpses, interviewed dying warbosses, and even survived my own death 3 times. You think that makes me some kind of traitor to the war, a weird git obsessed with un-orky thoughts, but you don't know what I've seen in those final moments. The orcs don't fear death like you do. They don't mourn it. They don't even really believe in it. And that's not because they're stupid. It's because they know something about the universe that would break your fragile human mind. Chapter 1. Green is eternal. I wasn't always a philosopher, started out normal enough, spawned from the fungal beds of Octarius, came out swinging, learned to fix a shooter before I could count past 5. That's the orc way. You don't think about tomorrow because you're too busy crumping today. But I was always a bit odd, even for a mech boy. The other mechs noticed it first. While they were arguing about whether red paint made trucks faster, or if it was the belief in red paint that made trucks faster, I was watching the old knobs, the really old ones. Orcs don't get old often. We die fighting long before age catches up. But the ones who do, they change, not in body, in the way they laugh before a charge. Warboss Grakka was 217 years old when I met him. Impossible age for an orc. He was leading the Goth warband that controlled the northern scrapyards of Octarius, a massive brute who'd survived everything the Tyranids could throw at him. His face was more scar tissue than green skin, and he had this habit of talking to his chopper like it was his best mate. "Oi, Grotnik!" he bellowed at me one day while I was rewiring his mega armor's power claw. "You ever wonder where we come from?" I looked up from the sparking circuitry. "The spores, boss. Everyone knows that." His laugh shook the whole workshop. "Nah, you get. Before the spores, before the fungus, where did the first orcs come from?" It was the most un-orky question I'd ever heard. Orcs don't wonder about origins. We just are. We fight. We grow. We make more spores when we die. It's the cycle. But something in his scarred face made me think harder. "The old ones made us, boss, for the war in heaven. Everyone knows that too." "Right. Made us to fight. Made us to never stop fighting." He tested the power claw, watching the energy field crackle. "But if we was made to fight forever, what happens when one of us stops? When the fighting's done for good?" I didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Orcs don't have priests or philosophers. We have weird boys who channel the Waaagh energy and mad docs who patch us up. But nobody sits around thinking about death. It's just not done. That conversation stuck in my head like a burr. Started making me watch the other boys different. When an orc dies in battle, properly dies, not just gets patched up, there's always a moment, a flicker. The other orcs see it too, but they don't talk about it. They just loot the body and move on. But I started paying attention to that flicker. The first proper study I did was during the assault on Hive Tertius. The Blood Axes had allied with Grakka's Goths for a massive push against the Humi defenders. 12,000 orcs charging fortified positions. Beautiful, brutal, and expensive. We lost 900 boys in the first hour. I hung back with the pain boys, which earned me some suspicious looks. Mechs are supposed to fix the vehicles, not watch the casualties. But I'd brought tools, different tools. I had a Humi data slate I'd looted years ago, modified to measure psychic frequencies. The weird boys used similar tech to avoid getting their heads exploded by too much Waaagh energy. When a knob named Grazza took a Lascannon blast through the chest, I was there within seconds. His body was ruined, spine severed, organs burned, but orcs are tough. He had maybe 30 seconds before the shock and blood loss finished him. "Grazza," I said, leaning close. "What do you see?" His eyes were still focused, still angry. "I see. Green fields, you get. Green everywhere. And Gork and Mork. They're having a scrap." He laughed, blood bubbling from his mouth. "They're arguing about who gets to crump me first." Then the light went out. But my data slate went insane. Psychic energy spiked. Not the normal Waaagh field that every orc generates, but something different. Something that shot straight up like a flare before dispersing into the general psychic background of the battlefield. I measured 17 more dying orcs that day. Every single one had the same energy spike. Every single one said something about green fields, or Gork and Mork fighting, or a massive Waaagh calling them home. The Humies call it life after death, or the afterlife, and they build whole religions around it. They're terrified of what comes next. They beg their corpse god to save them. They bargain and weep and cling to life with desperate fingers. Orcs do none of that. Because for us, death isn't an ending. It's not even really a transition. It's just different fighting. I spent the next 5 years studying it proper. Had to do it sneaky-like because asking too many questions about death is suspicious. Orcs are supposed to think about fighting, not dying. But I was careful. Asked the old knobs when they were drunk on fungus beer. Listened to the stories the boys told around the fires. Paid attention to what the weird boys muttered when they thought nobody was listening. Picture started coming together. The orcs have something the Humies don't. Genetic memory. We're born knowing how to speak, how to fight, how to build. Some orcs are born knowing how to fix engines even if they've never seen one. That's the genetic memory the old ones coded into us. And that memory doesn't just cover mechanical knowledge. It covers death too. Every orc is born knowing that death isn't the end. It's coded into us at the fungal level. We know, not believe, not hope, but know that when we die proper, our psychic essence gets absorbed back into the Waaagh field, that massive green energy that every orc contributes to and draws from. And in that field, Gork and Mork are always fighting, always arguing, always having the best time. That's where we go. Not some Humie heaven with clouds and singing. Not some chaos hell with torture and suffering. Just endless fighting with the gods themselves, in fields that stretch forever, under a green sun that never sets. Warboss Grakka died 3 months after our first conversation. Tyrannid Carnifex got him during a midnight raid. Took his head clean off with one swipe. I was there. I measured the energy spike. And in that final moment, as his body toppled, I swear I heard him laughing. Not the laugh of someone terrified of oblivion. The laugh of someone heading home to the best fight of his life. Chapter 2. The death that isn't word got around that I was studying death. Couldn't help it. When you're hovering around casualties with strange equipment, people notice. Most orcs thought I was just a weird git. Some thought I was useful for predicting who'd survive injuries. But one orc saw potential in my research. His name was Urgork the Unseen, and he was a Kommando knob who'd survived more deaths than any orc I'd ever met. He had this uncanny ability to get shot, stabbed, blown up and buried, only to show up 3 days later demanding his back pay. "I heard you're interested in dying," he said, appearing behind me in my workshop one night. Nearly jumped out of my skin, which made him laugh. Good, because I've died 6 times and I got questions. I turned around, wrench in hand. 6 times. Bullshit. Nobody dies 6 times. Course not. Because I didn't really die, did I? But I got close enough to see the other side. He sat down on a pile of scrap metal, unusually serious for a commando. And I want to know what I saw. He told me his stories. The first death was during his youth. Took a bolter round through the lung. Remembers feeling the Waaagh field pulling at him, like strong hands yanking him toward a massive green light. But a pain boy dragged him back before he could let go. Second time was worse. Buried alive in a trench collapse during the Armageddon campaigns. Suffocated completely. Heart stopped. Brain shut down. Says he was gone for several minutes before they dug him out and a Mad Dok shocked him back. During those minutes he walked in the green fields. Saw other orcs fighting. Saw Gork and Mork having their eternal argument. So big they blocked out the sky. But here's the weird bit, Urgork said, leaning forward. I saw orcs I knew. Boys from my old mob who died years ago. And they were happy, Grotnik. Happiest I'd ever seen them. Fighting, laughing, crumping each other over and over. And nobody stayed dead. They just got back up and went at it again. This matched other accounts I'd collected. The afterlife, if you could call it that, wasn't restful. It was pure fighting. Eternal combat with stakes that didn't matter because nobody could permanently die there. The perfect existence for an orc. "What brought you back?" I asked. He shrugged. Painboy was real good at his job. But also, I think I wasn't done here yet. Felt like the Waaagh had more fighting for me to do in the real world, so I came back. He paused. All 6 times. I started documenting cases like Orks. Turns out they weren't that rare. Maybe 1 in 50 orcs who died somehow came back if they were revived quickly enough. And almost all of them reported the same thing. Green fields, endless combat, Gork and Mork watching over it all. But here's what made it different from Hume afterlife stories. Nobody was judged. There was no good orc heaven and bad orc hell. No weighing of souls or punishment for sins. You died. You joined the big Waaagh. You fought forever. Simple. Clean. Orky. The Humies would call it crude or primitive, but I think they're jealous. Their afterlife is full of conditions and rules. Be good enough, believe hard enough, serve the right master. Orcs don't have that anxiety. We know where we're going, and we know it's going to be a good fight. Started wondering about the mechanics of it. The psychic energy spike I measured, where did it go? I modified my equipment to track it further, built a better sensor array using parts from a destroyed Imperial shrine. The Humies had some decent psychic detection gear once you stripped out all the prayers and purity seals. Next major battle was the defense of Scrap Peak against the Chaos Warband. 4,000 orcs versus 1,200 Chaos Space Marines and their demonic allies. Brutal fighting. The kind where you measure casualties in hundreds per hour. I set up my equipment on a ridge overlooking the main battlefield. My new sensors could track psychic signatures for several kilometers before they dispersed. And what I found changed everything I thought I understood. When an orc died, the energy spike didn't just vanish into the sky. It curved, bent towards something. I followed the trajectory with my sensors, triangulating from multiple death sites. All the energy was flowing to the same place, a point about 15 kilometers away, where the largest concentration of orcs was gathering for the next assault wave. The dead were feeding the living. Their psychic essence was flowing directly into the Waaagh field that powered the survivors, making them stronger, faster, more confident. The more orcs died, the more powerful the remaining orcs became. It was feedback loop. Perfect survival mechanism. The dead didn't leave. They just changed forms. They became part of the collective energy that made every orc more dangerous. I watched a young boy named Scrag during the battle. Saw him get caught by Chaos Marines, outnumbered 5-1. Saw him scream the Waaagh cry as 6 of his mates died around him. And in that moment, as their psychic energy washed over him, I saw him change. His eyes went pure green. His muscles swelled. He tore through those Marines like they were made of paper. Afterwards, when I asked him what happened, he couldn't explain it. Just felt the boys with me, you know? Felt like they was pushing me forward, telling me to crump them chaos gets proper. The dead weren't gone. They were still fighting. Just through the living now. That night, after the battle, I found Urgork again. Told him what I'd discovered. He nodded slowly, like it confirmed something he'd suspected. Makes sense, he said. When I was in the green fields, I could still feel the real world, could feel the fights happening. And I wanted to help, even though I was somewhere else. He looked at his hands. Maybe that's why I came back. Maybe we all come back in a way, just not always in our own bodies. I was beginning to understand something the Humies never could. They saw death as separation, the soul leaving the body, departing to some distant realm. But for orcs, death was integration. You joined the Waaagh, became part of the whole. Your individual spark merged with the massive green fire that powered the entire species. Which meant, in a very real sense, no orc ever truly died. We just changed our relationship to the fight. But questions remained. The biggest one, what about Gork and Mork? Were they real beings? or just metaphors for the Waaagh itself? And if they were real, what exactly were they? I needed to talk to a weird boy, and I knew just the insane git to ask. Chapter 3. The Green Gods Watching. Weird Boy Zagrot was probably the most powerful psyker in the whole sector, which meant he was also probably insane. All weird boys go a bit mad from channeling the Waaagh energy. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. But Zagrot was special. He'd been hit by so much psychic feedback over his 60-year career that his skull had actually started glowing green in the dark. Finding him wasn't hard. You just followed the trail of unconscious Gretchen and smoking craters. He was camped on the edge of the war zone, far enough from the main mob that the Waaagh field didn't constantly threaten to explode his brain, but close enough to lend his powers when needed. "Grotnik the Death Watcher," he said when I approached, not turning around. He was staring at a pile of rocks he'd arranged in some kind of pattern. "You want to know about the gods?" Wasn't even surprised he knew. Weird boys can sense psychic intentions. "Yeah, Gork and Mork. Are they real?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Real? Real? Nothing's real. Everything's real. Reality is just what enough orcs believe at once." He spun around, his eyes literally crackling with green energy. "But yeah, they're real. More real than you, more real than me, more real than this whole stupid material universe." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen them, you stupid git." He grabbed my head with both hands and suddenly I was seeing what he saw. The warp. The immaterium. The psychic dimension underlying reality. It was chaos, pure chaos, except for two massive spots of green clarity. Two impossibly huge presences that weren't so much beings as they were. Concepts given form. Fighting concepts. Violence made conscious. Gork, the cunningly brutal god. Mork, the brutally cunning god. Always fighting, always arguing about which approach was better. Their eternal argument literally shaped reality for every orc in existence. And around them, in them, part of them, billions of orc souls. Not suffering, not praising, but fighting. Adding their strength to the gods. Becoming the gods. Zagrot released my head, and I fell back, gasping. That's where we go? That's where we're already at, you dense git." He started pacing in circles. "You think your soul is separate from the Waaagh? You think there's a live Grotnik, and then dead Grotnik, and they're different things? Nah. You're already part of Gork and Mork. Your body dying just makes it more obvious." He explained it in his fractured, mad way, but the picture came together. The orc gods weren't like the Humi Emperor or the Chaos gods. They weren't distant beings who demanded worship or sacrifice. They were literally made of orcs. Every orc that had ever lived and died had become part of Gork and Mork, and every living orc was already connected to them through the Waaagh field. "So death doesn't change anything," I said slowly. "We're already connected to the gods. Dying just changes the connection." "Now you're getting it!" Zagrot clapped his hands, sending off sparks. "Your body is like a sensor probe, separate from the main ship, but still connected. When the probe breaks, the data comes home. You come home, join the main consciousness. But you were never really separate to begin with." It was the most un-Humi concept of afterlife I'd ever encountered. The Humis saw death as this massive transformation, this crossing into the unknown. But for orcs, it was just continuing. Different continuing, sure, but no scarier than going to sleep. "What about orcs who worship chaos?" I asked. "The ones who turn traitor and serve the ruinous powers?" Zagrot's face went dark. "They break the connection, cut themselves off from the Waaagh, and yeah, then they're proper dead when they die. Their souls get eaten by the chaos gods, torn apart, used for fuel. It's the only real death an orc can experience, choosing separation from the Waaagh." That explained why traitor orcs were so hated. It wasn't just that they fought against other orcs. That happened all the time, and nobody cared that much. It was that they rejected the fundamental orcness of their existence. They chose to be alone instead of part of the whole. "Can I talk to them?" I asked suddenly. "The dead ones, through the Waaagh field. Zagrot looked at me like I'd suggested eating a bolt round. Talk to them? Grotnik, you're talking to them every time you feel the Waaagh. Every time you get that surge of energy before a charge, that's the dead pushing you forward. Every time you know exactly where to hit the enemy, that's millennia of dead orcs whispering tactics through the field. You just don't recognize it as conversation. He demonstrated, closing his eyes and reaching out with his psychic senses. I felt the war field pulse, felt it stronger than ever before because he was amplifying it for me. And in that pulse, I heard voices, thousands of voices, millions, all shouting encouragement, battle cries, tactical advice, insults, jokes. The dead weren't silent. They were the loudest things in the universe. We just didn't have the right ears to hear them clearly. The Humies call it ancestor worship, Zagrot said, opening his eyes. They think they're asking dead people for help. But for orcs, it's not asking. The ancestors are already helping, always helping. Can't stop helping because they're still part of the fight. I thought about all the battles I'd witnessed, all the moments when a boy somehow dodged a shot he couldn't have seen coming, or knew exactly where to place a charge to bring down a wall, or felt the sudden urge to move right before an artillery shell landed on his position. Instinct, we called it. Luck. Being green. But it was really the dead, wasn't it? Billions of orcs who died over millennia, all still invested in the fight, all still pushing their living brothers toward victory. What happens if all the orcs die? I asked. If every living orc is killed, do the gods die too? Zagrot laughed. Can't happen. There's always more orcs. The fungus is everywhere. Wherever we fight, we leave spores. Wherever we die, we grow back. The old ones made us to never end, and they did a proper job of it. He paused. But even if every orc died at once, Gork and Mork would still be there. They're too big now, fed by too many dead. They'd just wait in the warp until new orcs evolved from the fungus. Might take 1,000 years, might take 1,000,000, but they'd wait. Gods are patient when they know their followers will return. It was beautiful, in a brutal sort of way. The orcs had achieved something the Humies spent their whole existence seeking. True immortality. Not individual immortality, but species immortality. Perfect continuity through death. The Humies feared death because they were individuals first, species second. They wanted their specific consciousness, their specific memories, their specific personality to continue. Losing that was their greatest terror. Orcs didn't have that problem. We were species first, individual second. My personality, my memories, they mattered while I was alive because they helped the Waaagh. But when I died, those things would blend into the collective knowledge. Other orcs would draw on them without knowing they were mine. And that was fine. Better than fine. That was perfect. One more question, I said. When we're in the green fields in the afterlife, are we still ourselves? Or do we just become part of the mass? Zagrot considered this, which was unusual for him. Usually he just shouted answers. Bit of both, he finally said. You're you, but you're also everyone else. Like being in a mob, you're still Grotnik, but you're also just another boy in the charge, individual and collective at once. The Humies can't understand it because they see those as opposites. But they're not. They're the same thing from different angles. I understood then why Warboss Grakka had been laughing when he died. Why Urgork kept coming back from death's door. Why even the youngest boys charged into battle without fear. We weren't brave. We were informed. We knew death wasn't the end. Knew it with absolute certainty, coded into our very genes. The Humies called us stupid, savage, mindless. But we knew something they didn't. We knew how to die properly, how to become something greater while losing nothing that mattered. I thanked Zagrot and left him to his rock patterns. Had new understanding now. But understanding created new questions. If death was just joining the Waaagh, why did some orcs try so hard to survive? Why patch up injuries? Why retreat from losing battles? Why cling to life at all? There had to be more to it. Had to be something I was still missing. Chapter 4. When dying means something. The answer came during the siege of Kragmau's fortress, and it came in the worst way possible, through personal experience. The siege was supposed to be straightforward. Rival Warboss Grakka had been raiding our territory, so our Warboss, Grakka's successor, a massive goth named Bludrok, decided to sort it out proper. 2,000 Orks against Kragmor's fortress. Should have been a good fight. It was a good fight. Too good. Grakka had been preparing for months, had actual defensive strategy, which was suspicious for an Ork, had kill zones, overlapping fields of fire, prepared fallback positions. Either he had a Blood Axe advisor or he'd been reading Hume tactical manuals. I was with the second wave, supporting the mechs trying to breach the main gate. Had my measuring equipment because I never went anywhere without it anymore. Death followed Orks like flies followed corpses, and I wanted to document it all. The gate came down around noon. Massive explosion. Proper Orky. We charged through, screaming the Waaagh, ready to crump some gits. Walked right into an ambush. Grakka had rigged the courtyard with explosives. Buried them under scrap metal, so our sensors wouldn't pick them up. When 300 Orks were packed into that killing ground, he detonated everything at once. I remember the flash. Remember flying through the air, pieces of other Orks spinning around me. Remember hitting the wall hard enough to crack my skull. And then I remember dying. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't painful after the first moment. Just felt like falling asleep, except I could still see. My body was broken. Ribs piercing my lungs. Skull fractured, left arm gone entirely. Should have been lights out immediately, but I held on. Not because I was scared of death, because I was curious. The Waaagh field opened up around me like a door swinging wide. I could see it now, really see it, without any equipment or psychic assistance. The field was green, obviously, but it had texture, depth. It was made of countless strands, each strand an Ork life. And they were all woven together into something impossibly complex and beautiful. My strand was fraying, coming apart, and the rest of the field was reaching for it, ready to absorb what I'd been, ready to add my experiences to the collective knowledge. I could feel the green fields beyond, could feel Gork and Mork having their arguments somewhere in the distance, their voices like thunder, could feel millions of other Orks fighting, dying, getting back up, fighting again. The eternal war. It looked good, better than good. It looked like home. But then I felt something else. A tug. Not from the green fields. From behind me. From the material world. From my body. A pain boy had found me. Dok Grotsnik, one of the best. He was shouting something about experimental procedures and not wasting good parts. His tools were already cutting into my chest, rewiring my heart, forcing my lungs to work despite the holes in them. I had a choice. I could feel it clearly, could let go, slip into the green fields, join the eternal fight. Or I could grab hold of the pain, the agony of my body being forcibly restarted, and come back. In that moment, I understood why Orks fight to survive even though we know death is fine. It's not about fear. It's about having more to do, more fighting to finish. More enemies to crump. The green fields are great, but they're eternal. They'll always be there. The material world is temporary, limited, and that makes it precious in a way the afterlife can't be. I grabbed the pain, grabbed it hard, pulled myself back from the edge of dissolution. My strand rewove itself, thickening, solidifying. The door to the green fields swung closed. I gasped air into ruined lungs and screamed. Not from pain, from frustration. Had been so close to understanding everything, so close to joining the big Waaagh. And I'd chosen to come back to this limited, damaged, fragile body. "He's back!" Grotsnik shouted. "I'm a genius! I'm the best pain boy in the whole Waaagh!" He was right to celebrate. I shouldn't have survived. My body was held together with metal plates, bionic parts, and what Grotsnik cheerfully called experimental tissue adhesive, which was definitely just fungus paste. But I was alive. Took me 3 days to recover enough to think properly. The battle was over by then. Bludrok had won after suffering 60% casualties, which he considered an acceptable exchange ratio. Cragmore was dead, his fortress was ours, and we'd looted enough weapons to equip another 1,000 boys. But I'd learned something more valuable than any loot. The reason orcs fight to survive, even knowing death is just another kind of fighting, is because material existence offers something the green fields don't: progression, change, the chance to be part of history instead of eternity. In the green fields, you fight forever, but nothing changes. You can't build a bigger Waaagh, can't unite the clans, can't conquer new worlds. You're static, eternal, but unchanging. It's perfect for orcs who've finished their story. But living orcs can still write new stories, can still grow bigger, stronger, more cunning, can still achieve things that echo through the Waaagh field and make even the dead pay attention. That's what Warboss Grakka had understood. That's why he'd survived so long. Not because he feared death, but because he knew his story wasn't finished. He had more fighting to do in the material world. And when his story finally was complete, when that Carnifex took his head, he'd gone laughing because it was time. His chapter was done. The green fields waited. I started interviewing the old knobs again, the ones who'd survived dozens of battles. Asked them why they kept fighting, why they didn't just let the next hit take them down. "Because I ain't done yet," said Knob Grazka, who'd lost an eye, an arm, and most of his jaw to various battles. "When I'm done, I'll know, and then I'll let the next git take his shot. But until then, I got boys to lead and enemies to crump." "Because someone's got to teach the young'uns," said Knob Thraka, who'd been fighting for 90 years. "Can't let 'em grow up stupid. When I've taught enough, when there's enough boys who know what I know, then I'll be done. Then I can go fight forever without worrying about the mob." Each one had a reason, a purpose that kept them tied to material existence. Not fear of death, purpose in life. And the young boys who died quickly, they didn't have that yet. They were pure fighting spirit, no purpose beyond the next scrap. So they went to the green fields easy, no hesitation, because they'd already fulfilled their role. They'd fought, that was enough. But the orcs who survived, who lived long enough to become knobs and warbosses, they developed purposes beyond simple fighting. They wanted to lead, to teach, to build something that would outlast them. And that's what kept them alive through injuries that should have killed them. It wasn't better or worse than dying young. Just different. Different story. Different relationship with death. I thought about my own purpose. Why had I chosen to come back? What did I have left to do? The answer was obvious. I needed to finish understanding this, needed to document it, needed to make sure other orcs knew what I'd learned about death and the Waaagh. Not because it would change anything, orcs would still fight the same way, but because knowledge had value, understanding had purpose. Gutslag found me in my workshop a week later, checking my new bionic arm. Half my body was metal now. I was more machine than orc, which was fine. The organic parts were overrated anyway. "Heard you died and came back," he said. "What was it like?" I told him. Told him everything. The green fields, the choice, the understanding. He listened quietly, which was unusual for a pain boy. They're usually shouting about how clever they are. "So death is just another deployment," he said finally. "Different battlefield, different rules, but still a fight." "Yeah, that's exactly it." He nodded slowly. "And some boys are ready for that deployment. Some ain't. Some got more fighting to do here first. Yeah, that's beautiful, Grotnik." In a brutal, orky sort of way, he stood up. "When you finally die for good, make sure someone good patches together your body. I want your bionic designs for the next generation." It was the most meaningful thing anyone had ever said to me. He understood. When I was done, when I finally let go and went to the green fields, my purpose would continue through the knowledge I left behind, through the modifications other mechs would make to my designs, through the stories orcs would tell about the weird git who studied death. That was immortality, not the endless fighting in the green fields. That was just existence. True immortality was leaving a mark on the material world that changed how future orcs fought and thought and lived. The Humies understood this in their way. They built monuments, wrote books, created art, all trying to leave something behind. But they did it from fear of being forgotten, from terror of meaninglessness. Orks did it from love. Love of the Waaagh, love of the fight, love of the next generation who'd carry on the fight when we were gone. We didn't fear death because we knew our people would continue, knew our knowledge would continue, knew the Waaagh would never end, and that made all the difference. Chapter 5. The Moment of Choosing. 3 months after my near-death experience, Warboss Grakka called a massive Waaagh. The target was an Imperial Forge world called Metallica, a proper industrial planet. Millions of defenders, enough weapons to crump an entire sector. Exactly the kind of fight that made Orks travel across the galaxy. 50,000 Orks answered the call. We came from 6 different systems, unified under Grakka's vision of looting the best technology the Imperium had to offer. It was going to be glorious. It was going to be brutal. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that thousands of Orks were going to die. I'd prepared for this, had upgraded all my monitoring equipment, had trained 3 young mechs to use it if I went down, had written down everything I'd learned about Ork death, consciousness, and the Waaagh field. If this was going to be my last deployment in the material world, I wanted to make sure the knowledge survived. But I'd also prepared mentally, had accepted that I might die. More than accepted, had made peace with it. If my time came during the assault on Metallica, I'd go laughing like Grakka, would go knowing my purpose was fulfilled, my knowledge was recorded, and the green fields waited with open arms. The approach to Metallica took 6 weeks. 50,000 Orks crammed into a fleet of ramshackle cruisers, rock ships, and repurposed space hulks. The Waaagh energy during the journey was incredible, could feel it building every day as more Orks joined the psychic field, all focused on the same goal, all dreaming of the fight to come. Zagrot the weird boy nearly exploded 4 times during the journey. The psychic pressure was that intense. I had to install dampening fields around his quarters just to keep him from accidentally vaporizing nearby Gretchen. "Can you feel them?" he asked me one night, eyes glowing bright green. "The dead ones. They're excited, Grotnik. They remember Metallica. Some of them died there last time we tried to take it. They want another go." I could feel it. The Waaagh field had layers, and if you knew how to listen, you could hear echoes from Orks who died decades or even centuries ago. And yes, they were excited. Death hadn't dimmed their enthusiasm for fighting. It had, if anything, made it stronger. "What happens to Orks who die in the warp?" I asked suddenly. "Between deployments, when we're traveling? Do they still reach the green fields?" Zagrot laughed. "The warp is the green fields you get, just different parts of it. When you die in real space, your psychic energy has to travel through the warp to reach Gork and Mork. But if you're already in the warp, direct delivery. Fastest way to join the big Waaagh." That explained why Orks weren't afraid of warp travel. The Humies treated it like the most dangerous thing imaginable. And for them, it was. Chaos could corrupt them. Demons could eat their souls. The warp itself could drive them insane. But Orks, we were already connected to a warp presence, already protected by Gork and Mork's brutal reality. The Chaos Gods couldn't touch us unless we specifically chose to serve them. Another layer of understanding clicked into place. The Orks weren't just fearless about death. We were fearless about everything related to death. The warp, the afterlife, the fundamental nature of reality. Because all of it was just different aspects of the same eternal fight. The assault on Metallica began with a proper Orky opening. We crashed 17 rock ships directly into the planet's surface, each one packed with hundreds of screaming boys ready to crump. The Imperial Defense Network shot down 32 of our ships before they could land, killing thousands of Orks in brilliant explosions across the upper atmosphere. From my monitors, I watched those death signatures, watched thousands of psychic sparks flare and then flow into the surviving Orks below. The boys who made it to the surface were glowing with Waaagh energy, supercharged by their dead brother's fury. We hit the ground hard. My rock crashed through a manufacturing district, killing everyone inside, Orks and Humies alike. but creating a perfect beachhead in the heart of enemy territory. Within 30 seconds of impact, we were charging out of the wreckage, firing wildly, screaming challenges at the panicked Imperial defenders. I stayed close to Bloodrock. The Warboss was leading from the front, as proper Orks always do, his mega armor crushing everything in his path. Around him, boys were dying, shot down by lass fire, blown apart by artillery, crushed by collapsing buildings. But each death made the survivors stronger. The Waaagh field was a visible thing now, shimmering green around the mob, pulsing with every heartbeat. Then I saw it happen, the moment that changed everything I thought I understood. A young boy named Scrot took a plasma blast to the chest. Should have killed him instantly. The heat alone should have boiled his blood. But he didn't die. Instead, he stood there, hole burned through his torso, and laughed. The Waaagh energy flowing through him was so intense that it literally held him together despite his fatal injury. He charged forward, impossibly still fighting, and killed 6 more Imperial guards before his body finally gave out. And when he fell, his death signature was different, brighter, more powerful, like he'd accumulated more psychic weight during those final impossible seconds. I saw it happen again and again. Orks who should have died immediately kept fighting, kept moving, kept killing, sustained entirely by the Waaagh field. They were already dead. Their bodies were ruined beyond any possibility of survival, but they hadn't let go yet, hadn't chosen to slip into the green fields. They had one more enemy to crump first, one more hit to land, one more moment of glory, and the Waaagh field supported them. Drew on the power of the dead to keep the dying alive just a little longer, just long enough to finish their last fight. "Did you see that?" I shouted to Zagrot, who was nearby, his head literally crackling with green lightning as he channeled devastating psychic attacks at the Humi positions. "Course I saw it. Happens all the time in big wars." He gestured wildly. When the field is strong enough, when there's enough orcs and enough dying, the line between life and death gets thin. Boys can cross back and forth. Already dead gits can keep fighting. It's beautiful. It was beautiful and terrifying and made perfect sense. The orcs didn't just accept death. We could delay it. Not through medicine or technology like the Humies, but through pure collective will. Through the psychic field that connected us all. If an orc still had fighting to do, if the Waaagh still needed him, the dead would literally hold him together until his purpose was complete. That's why old warbosses could survive impossible injuries. Why knobs walked away from battles that should have killed them 10 times over. Not luck, not toughness, purpose. The Waaagh field recognizing that this particular orc still had a role to play in the material world. And when that role was done, the field let go. The orc died, joined the ancestors, became part of the collective consciousness that would support the next generation of fighters. I was documenting this frantically, taking readings, recording observations, trying to capture the data while also not getting shot. Had to dodge a battle cannon round that obliterated 3 boys standing next to me. Their death signatures flared bright, and I felt the energy wash over me like warm rain. For a moment, I knew their names, knew their stories, knew every fight they'd ever been in. Then the knowledge dispersed into the general Waaagh field, available to anyone who needed it, but no longer tied to individual identities. That was the trade-off. You gave up being you in exchange for being part of something infinitely bigger. Your experiences became everyone's experiences. Your skills became everyone's skills. Your courage became everyone's courage. The Humies would call it losing yourself. Orcs called it coming home. The battle raged for 16 hours straight. We pushed deep into the manufacturing districts, taking horrific casualties but gaining ground with each charge. The Imperial defenders fought well, had to give them credit, but they were fighting from fear. Fear of death, fear of failure, fear of their commissars shooting them for retreating. We were fighting from joy. Every orc on that battlefield was exactly where he wanted to be, doing exactly what he was born to do. And when we died knowing we'd joined brothers who were doing the same thing in the green fields. Around hour 12, I watched Warboss Grakka take a direct hit from a Lehman Russ battle cannon. should have killed him, should have vaporized half his body. But he was the focal point of the entire Waaagh field. 50,000 orcs all channeling their fighting spirit through him. The field absorbed the blast, spread the damage across the psychic network, so that instead of one orc dying, the energy was distributed across thousands. Bloodrock stumbled, roared, and charged forward, his power claw ripping the tank apart like paper. That's when I understood the final piece. The Waaagh field wasn't just a psychic phenomenon, it was a survival mechanism, a way for the species to distribute damage, to ensure that key orcs survived long enough to lead, while young orcs could die freely. Knowing their deaths strengthened the whole. It was brutal, it was efficient, it was perfect. The Humies tried to protect every soldier, tried to minimize casualties, tried to bring everyone home. It made them weak, made them hesitant, made them fear every loss. Orcs embraced loss, built it into our strategy, knew that every death made the survivors stronger, and that the dead themselves would keep fighting through the Waaagh field. We couldn't lose, could only win or die trying, and dying trying was just a different kind of winning. By hour 16, we'd taken the primary manufactorum, had lost 23,000 orcs doing it, nearly half our force. Any Humie general would call that a catastrophic defeat. Bloodrock called it a good start, because the surviving orcs were now twice as strong as when we'd landed, charged up by the deaths of their brothers, and the Imperial defenders were broken, terrified, falling back to secondary positions. We'd won, and the dead had won with us. I stood in the ruins of the manufactorum, surrounded by bodies, orc and Humie alike, and took one final set of readings. The Waaagh field was so thick here, it was almost visible to normal sight. Green energy swirling around the survivors, thick with the presence of the fallen. And in that field, I swear, I heard Warboss Grakka's laugh, heard Skrot's battle cry, heard the voices of every orc I'd ever watched die, all of them still fighting, still pushing, still part of the eternal Waaagh. They weren't gone, would never be gone, were as present as they'd ever been, just in a different form. And someday, I'd join them, but not yet, not until I'd finished documenting this. Not until every orc knew what I knew about death and purpose and the beautiful, brutal truth of our existence. Chapter 6. Living with the Dead. The campaign for Metallica lasted 8 months. We conquered 2 hive cities, 7 major manufactorums, and accumulated enough weapons to equip 5 new wars. Lost 42,000 orcs total, which Bloodrock considered excellent value. The Imperium considered it a strategic disaster and withdrew their remaining forces to defend more critical systems. During those 8 months, I refined my understanding of orc death into something approaching a complete theory. Had documented over 7,000 individual death events. Had interviewed hundreds of orcs about their experiences with near-death. Had worked with Zagrot to map the structure of the Waaagh field in unprecedented detail. And I'd learned to feel the dead constantly. That was the unexpected consequence of my research. Once you knew how to recognize the presence of fallen orcs in the Waaagh field, you couldn't stop noticing them. They were everywhere. Every decision I made was influenced by their accumulated wisdom. Every fight I survived was aided by their tactical knowledge. Every piece of technology I built incorporated techniques passed down through 10,000 years of dead mechs. The Humies would call it haunting. Orcs call it inheritance. I was working on a new truck design one day, trying to get more speed without sacrificing too much armor, when I felt a particular presence in the Waaagh field. Strong presence, familiar. I stopped working and just listened. It was Warboss Grakka. Or rather, it was the part of Grakka that still existed in the collective consciousness. His personality was mostly dissolved now, 4 years after his death, but his essence remained. His courage, his tactical brilliance, his absolute certainty in the orc way. And he was approving, encouraging, hard to put into words what psychic impressions felt like. But I knew, absolutely knew, that he was pleased with my research. Pleased that I was documenting the truth about orc death. Pleased that his death was helping me understand. You feel him too, don't you? Zagrod appeared in my workshop doorway, somehow sneaking up despite being a massive orc who glowed green. Grakka. He's been hanging around you for days. Thought I was imagining it. Nah, he's there. So are about 40 other warbosses who've taken an interest in your work. Zagrod wandered in, examining my half-built truck. They like what you're doing, like that someone's finally explaining it proper. Most orcs just know it instinctively, but you're making it conscious, making it something we can talk about. Does that change anything? I asked. Knowing versus just feeling. He thought about it, which again was unusual for him. Changes how we relate to it, maybe. Like, I can channel the Waaagh without understanding it. Just let it flow through me. But you're mapping it, explaining it. That's different knowledge, useful different. He was right. The young boys didn't need my research to fight well or die bravely. That was in their genes, in their bones. But the old knobs, the thinking orcs, the ones who led and planned and built, they could use this knowledge, could make better decisions knowing exactly how death fed the Waaagh, could lead more effectively, understanding how the fallen still contributed. Word had spread through the Waaagh about my research. Orcs started coming to me with questions. Not many. Most orcs didn't care. But the curious ones, the philosophical gits, the weird boys who thought about more than just the next fight. When I die, will I remember my mates? Asked a young boy named Grek. Will I know who I fought with? For a while, I told him. Your individual memories fade into the collective over time, but the connections remain. You'll still feel the bonds, even if you don't remember specific names. Good enough, he said, satisfied. Died 2 days later in a battle against Eldar raiders. I watched his death signature merge with the Waaagh field, watched his memories disperse like smoke, but the emotional bonds he'd formed, those persisted, became part of the general sense of brotherhood that every orc felt. What if I die badly? Asked Nobthraka, who'd survived 60 battles and was starting to worry about his ending. What if I don't get a good death? Does that matter? No, I told him honestly. Good death, bad death, glorious death, meaningless death, doesn't matter to the Waaagh. You fought while you lived. You join the eternal fight when you die. The manner of death is just story. What matters is that you lived orky. He relaxed visibly. So I don't got to worry about being remembered as the git who tripped and got shot. Nobody remembers that part. They remember the 60 battles before it. I paused. Well, they don't remember exactly. But the victories you won, the enemies you crumped, the boys you led, all that goes into the Waaagh field, becomes part of what makes every orc better at fighting. Your contribution isn't your death story, it's your life knowledge. That seemed to comfort the old knobs more than anything else I'd said. They were worried about legacy, about being remembered properly. But memory was Hume thinking. Orcs didn't need memory. We had something better. We had immediate, present tense contribution. The dead weren't remembered. They were active participants in every living orc's existence. Bloodrock summoned me to his command rock during the final stages of the Metallica campaign. He'd been wounded in 17 different battles, repaired by pain boys 16 times, and was held together by enough metal plates that he clinked when he walked. But he was still leading from the front, still the focal point of the Waaagh. Heard you've been studying death, he said without preamble. Good. Got questions? I waited. Warbosses didn't ask questions lightly. When I die, and I will die, everything does eventually, will the Waaagh continue without me? Or does it need a strong warboss to focus it? Honest question from a leader worried about his people. The Waaagh doesn't need any individual orc, I said. Not even a warboss. You focus it, make it stronger, give it direction. But if you fall, another warboss rises. The field chooses who's next. Usually whoever's biggest and strongest, but sometimes whoever has the best ideas or the most courage. The dead help choose too. They push their energy toward the orc who can best continue the fight. He nodded slowly. So, I'm not necessary. I'm just current. You're critical while you're here. But the Waaagh is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. That's not an insult. It's the point. We're not trying to build personal empires. We're trying to keep the eternal fight going. Good answer. He stood up, testing a newly repaired leg. When I do die, make sure it's documented proper. Want the young boys to know what a warboss thinks about in his final moments. You planning to die soon? He laughed. Nah, got at least 5 more good Waaghs in me. But I'm old enough to know it's coming. And I want to face it proper, like Grakka did, laughing. That's when I realized Bloodrock had already accepted his death, had already made peace with it. Wasn't fighting to survive forever, was fighting to accomplish as much as possible before the inevitable end. That's what separated good war bosses from great ones. The great ones knew they were temporary, so they fought harder to make their temporary existence count. Over the remaining months on Metallica, I watched the dynamic between living and dead orcs play out in countless small ways. A mech would suddenly understand how to fix a complex machine, dead mechs sharing knowledge. A boy would dodge an attack he couldn't have seen, dead warriors guiding his instincts. A pain boy would successfully perform a surgery he'd never been trained for, dead docs working through his hands. The Humies had saints and angels they prayed to for intervention. We had something infinitely better. Immediate, constant, practical support from every orc who'd ever lived. Not divine intervention, but cooperative existence across the boundary of death. And the best part? It required no faith, no belief, no hope. It just was. The Waaagh field connected all orcs, living and dead, at every moment. You didn't have to believe in it for it to work. It worked because that's how the old ones designed us. Faith was for species who weren't sure their afterlife existed. Orcs didn't need faith because we had evidence. Every weird boy channeling the dead, every near-death experience, every impossible survival, every moment of instinctive knowledge that came from nowhere. All evidence of the permanent connection between the living Waaagh and the eternal Waaagh. I thought about the Humie Emperor, sitting on his golden throne for 10,000 years, barely alive, worshipped by trillions who had no proof he even noticed them. Such a sad existence, such desperate hope that he was listening, that he cared, that he'd save them. Orcs didn't hope. We knew. Knew our gods were real because we could feel them every day. Knew our dead were present because they helped us fight. Knew death wasn't the end because orcs who'd crossed over and come back all told the same story. We were the most religious species in the galaxy, and we didn't even need religion to do it. Chapter 7. Teaching the truth. By the time we left Metallica, I'd become something unprecedented in orc society. A teacher of death. Not a pain boy keeping people from dying. Not a warboss leading people to glorious deaths. But someone who explained what death actually meant in the context of the eternal Waaagh. Young mechs started apprenticing with me. Not to learn technology. Plenty of mechs could teach that. They came to learn the theory. The why behind the what. The understanding that made everything else make sense. My first real student was a clever little git named Figwort. Too small to be a proper fighter, too smart to be satisfied with just fixing trucks. He'd heard about my research and tracked me down 3 days after we left Metallica. Teach me about the dead, he said bluntly. No preamble, no politeness. Proper Orky. Why? I asked. Doesn't affect your job. You'll build machines the same way whether you understand death or not. But I'll build them different if I understand why we build them. He pointed at my workshop, at the half-finished projects scattered everywhere. You build technology knowing that dead mechs are helping you. That changes what you build, makes it better. I want that. Smart Git understood the practical application immediately, so I taught him. Started with the basics, the Waaagh field structure, how psychic energy flows between living and dead, why orcs don't fear death. Figwort absorbed it all like a sponge. Within 2 weeks, he was designing better tech. Not because the designs were technically superior, but because he understood how to tap into the collective knowledge more efficiently. It's like having 10,000 mechs advising me at once, he said one day, working on a new force field generator. I just have to quiet my mind and feel what they're suggesting. That's exactly what it was. The Humies called it inspiration or genius or divine revelation. Orks called it listening to the dead. Same phenomenon, different interpretation. More students came. A young weird boy named Zagbos, who wanted to understand the psychic mechanics of death. A philosophical knob called Grimtuf, who'd survived 40 battles and wanted to know why. Even a few blood axes, the closest thing orcs had to intellectuals, who saw strategic value in understanding morale and fearlessness. I taught them all the same thing. Death is just transition, from material fighting to psychic fighting, from individual contribution to collective contribution, from temporary existence to eternal existence. Nothing to fear, nothing to mourn, just the next phase of being orky. But what about orcs, who don't fight good? Asked Zagbos during one lesson. Gretchen and Snotlings, do they get the same afterlife? Good question. I'd never thought about it. Don't know, I admitted. Never studied Gretchen deaths. They're part of the orc ecosystem, but are they part of the Waaagh? We did an experiment, captured some wild Gretchen, the feral kind that had never been enslaved, and measured their psychic signatures. They had a faint connection to the Waaagh field, much weaker than proper orcs, but present. And when one died, accidentally during the measurement process, its tiny psychic spark did merge with the field. Everything that comes from orc spores is part of the Waaagh, I concluded. Even the little gits, they're just smaller parts, like how a boy's contribution is smaller than a warboss's, but both contribute. That actually made Zagbos feel better. He'd always felt guilty about how orcs treated Gretchen. Now he understood they were still part of the eternal cycle, still connected to Gork and Mork, even if only distantly. The teaching changed me too. Having to explain things clearly forced me to understand them better. Had to answer questions I'd never asked myself. Had to defend positions I'd taken for granted. Made my knowledge sharper, more precise. What's the difference between an orc death and a Humi death? Grimtuf asked during an advanced lesson. Everything, I said. When a Humi dies, their soul separates from their body and travels through the warp alone, unprotected. They might reach their emperor, might get eaten by demons, might just dissolve into psychic background radiation. They don't know until it happens. And even their emperor can't protect them properly. He's too busy holding the Astronomicon together. I paused, organizing my thoughts. When an orc dies, our soul stays connected to the Waaagh field the whole time. We're never alone, never vulnerable. The field pulls us straight to Gork and Mork, and nothing can intercept us because we're already wrapped in divine protection. Our gods are active, engaged, fighting for us even in death. So Humies are afraid because they're actually vulnerable. Exactly. Their fear is rational. Their afterlife is uncertain. Ours isn't. We know where we're going because we're already there in some sense. Just shifting our primary existence from material to psychic. Teaching also attracted attention from the warbosses. Bloodrock started consulting me on strategy, not battle tactics but long-term planning. How to keep a Waaagh motivated. How to handle massive casualties without breaking morale. How to make every orc death count for something. The Humies break after losing 20% casualties, he said during one consultation. We can lose 80% and keep fighting. That's tactical advantage, but only if I can explain to the knobs why it works. So I taught the knobs. Explained that every orc death strengthened the survivors through the Waaagh field. That casualties weren't losses, they were transfers of energy. That the dead were still fighting, just through different channels. That no orc died alone or afraid or meaninglessly. It changed how the knobs led. They stopped trying to preserve every boy's life, that was Humi thinking, and started focusing on maximizing each orc's contribution. Get as much fighting done as possible while alive, then let the Waaagh field absorb your experience when you fell. Every death became a teaching moment for the survivors, mediated by the psychic field. Casualties actually went down, ironically, not because orcs fought more carefully, but because they fought smarter. The dead were better teachers than I could ever be. They shared tactical knowledge instantly, showed living orcs where the dangers were, guided them toward better positions. The Waaagh field became a real-time tactical network powered by accumulated combat experience from millions of battles. You've weaponized understanding, Bloodrock told me after a particularly successful campaign. Made the boys conscious of what they used to just feel. That's dangerous. Dangerous how? Because it makes us more like Humies. They think about death, fear it, plan around it. We just accepted it and fought. Now we're thinking about it too. I understood his concern. Overthinking could paralyze. Fear could creep in once you started analyzing. But I'd watched the boys who understood my teachings, and they weren't fearful. They were fiercer, more confident, more willing to take risks because they understood those risks in context. Thinking about death doesn't make us fear it, I said. It makes us respect it, use it, understand our place in the eternal cycle. That makes us better orcs, not worse. He accepted that, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. And maybe he was right to be skeptical. Maybe consciousness of death was dangerous. Maybe some truths were better left as instinct. But I couldn't unknow what I knew, couldn't unlearn what I'd discovered. And the students kept coming, kept asking questions, kept wanting to understand. So I kept teaching, kept explaining, kept mapping the relationship between life, death, and the eternal Waaagh. It was my purpose now. My reason for staying in the material world instead of slipping into the green fields. Someday I'd finish this work. Someday every orc who wanted to understand would have access to the knowledge, and then I'd let go. Would join Grakka and all the others in the eternal fight. Would become part of the collective consciousness I'd spent so long studying. But not yet. Not while there were still orcs who needed to hear this truth. The teaching expanded beyond what I'd ever imagined. Word spread through the orc networks, the informal chains of communication that connected warbands across sectors. A mech who understood death, a researcher who documented the green fields, a teacher who could explain why orcs didn't fear what every other species dreaded. They came from everywhere. Blood axes seeking tactical advantages, goths wanting to understand the warrior spirit better, even death skulls looking to loot knowledge instead of equipment. My workshop became something unprecedented in orc culture. A school, not a formal institution. Orcs don't do formal, but a place where curious gits could gather, ask questions, and learn about the fundamental nature of their existence, where the weird ones, the thinkers, the philosophers could find others like them and not feel so alone. A young pain boy named Snickut arrived one day with a problem that was eating at him. I save boys, he said, his voice troubled. Patch 'em up, keep 'em fighting. But sometimes I wonder if I'm doing them wrong. Maybe dying in that moment would have been better. Maybe I'm keeping them from the green fields when they should go. It was a profound ethical question, one I'd never considered during my research because I'd been focused on understanding death, not judging the value of life versus afterlife. Sit down, I told him. This is going to take a while. We talked for 6 hours, discussed purpose and timing, explored the idea that every orc had a role to play in the material world, and that role wasn't finished until it was finished. Saving a boy who had more fighting to do wasn't keeping him from the green fields. It was ensuring he completed his contribution before joining them. But how do you know? Snickut pressed. How do you know if an orc's purpose is done or not? You don't, I admitted, but that's not your decision to make. Your job is to save them if you can. Their job is to keep fighting if they're meant to. The Waaagh field will sort out the rest. If an orc is truly done, no amount of surgery will save them. The field lets go, and they die despite your best efforts. Ever notice that? His eyes widened. Yeah, I have noticed that. Sometimes I do everything right, and they die anyway. Like something just gave up inside them. That's the Waaagh field releasing them. Recognizing their story as complete. But if they survive your surgery, if they come back from injuries that should have killed them, that's the field saying they've got more to do. You're not interfering with destiny, you're facilitating it. Snickut left my workshop with a new understanding of his role. He wasn't just a doctor keeping bodies alive. He was a gatekeeper, working with the Waaagh field to determine who stayed and who crossed over. Sacred work, in its own brutal way. Word of that conversation spread. More pain boys came to talk. Then weird boys, struggling with their powers and wondering what happened if the war energy finally exploded their skulls. Then old knobs facing their mortality and wanting reassurance that their lives had mattered. I gave them all the same message, tailored to their specific concerns. Your contribution doesn't end with death. It transforms. Physical fighting becomes psychic support. Individual knowledge becomes collective wisdom. Personal courage becomes species-wide inspiration. But the most unexpected, students were the Gretchen. A small delegation of them showed up one night. 5 Gretchen who'd somehow learned to read and had gotten their hands on my tome. They were terrified, shaking, clearly expecting to be punted across the workshop for their presumption. But they had questions. Do we get the green fields too? Their leader, a scarred little git named Nipsquig, asked in a trembling voice. Or is it just for proper orcs? I'd done the research, knew the answer, but delivering it to these small, frightened creatures who spent their lives being kicked around by their larger cousins, that was different than presenting data. You're part of the orc ecosystem, I said carefully, born from the same spores, connected to the same Waaagh field, even if your connection is weaker. So yeah, you get the green fields, Might be a different part of them. The research isn't complete on that. But you go somewhere. You're not alone when you die. The relief on their faces was profound. One of them started crying. We thought we just ended, Nipsquig said. Thought we died and there was nothing. That we were too small to matter to Gork and Mork. Everything that comes from the spores matters, I told them. Big contributions, small contributions, all contributions. The Waaagh doesn't judge by size, just by whether you played your part. They left transformed, started spreading the word to other Gretchen, and something unexpected happened. The Gretchen started fighting better. Not because they were braver exactly, but because they had hope, had certainty, had the same genetic knowledge that proper Orks possessed, just weaker, and now they knew how to access it. Some Orks grumbled about teaching Gretchen, about giving them ideas above their station, but I noticed those same Orks had more effective Gretchen servants afterwards. Knowledge didn't make the little gits rebellious, it made them more efficient, made them understand their role in the larger ecosystem and embrace it rather than resent it. The teaching also attracted enemies. Not everyone wanted Orks thinking about death. Some warbosses preferred their boys simple and unquestioning. Some worried that understanding death might reduce the reckless courage that made Orks so effective. A goth knob named Thugrok confronted me during a public gathering. You're making Orks soft, he accused, making them think instead of fight. We don't need philosophy, we need warriors. Understanding death makes Orks fight better, I countered. They take smarter risks, listen to ancestral wisdom, support each other more effectively. The boys who've studied my work have higher survival rates in early battles, which means they live long enough to become knobs like you. Higher survival rates? He spat. We're Orks! We're supposed to die gloriously. And we do. But dying in your first battle because you charge stupidly isn't glorious, it's wasteful. Dying in your 50th battle after learning everything you could and passing it to the next generation, that's glorious. That's Orky. My teaching doesn't prevent death. It ensures death means something. The crowd of Orks watching our confrontation muttered agreement. Thugrok saw he was losing the argument and did the Orky thing, challenged me to a fight. I was a mech, not a warrior, but I accepted because refusing would have invalidated everything I'd taught. We fought in the traditional way. Big circle, hand to hand. First to submit or die loses. Thugrok was bigger, stronger, more experienced in combat, should have crushed me in seconds. But I was connected to the Waaagh field in ways he wasn't. Could feel the dead warriors guiding my movements. Knew exactly where he'd strike because 10,000 dead knobs were showing me his patterns. Felt the ancestral knowledge flowing through me like electricity. I didn't win, he was too physically superior, but I lasted 15 minutes and landed enough hits that he respected my ability. When he finally pinned me, both of us were bleeding and grinning. You fight pretty good for a thinker, he admitted, helping me up. Maybe understanding death doesn't make you soft after all. After that, opposition to my teaching decreased significantly. Orks respected action over words, and I'd proven I could back up my philosophy with my fists. The schools grew, the students multiplied, the understanding spread. I documented everything obsessively. Every question, every answer, every new insight. Built additional tomes covering specific topics. Death in combat, death from disease, death in space, death from chaos corruption. Created a library of mortality studies that covered every way an Ork could die and what it meant. Figvort suggested we create a repository, a physical place where all the research would be stored, protected, accessible to future generations. We chose a rock fortress on the edge of the war zone, far enough from constant battle that it wouldn't be destroyed, close enough that Orks could reach it when they needed answers. The repository of the eternal Waaagh, we called it. Pompous name, but accurate. It held not just my research, but contributions from hundreds of other philosophical Orks, studies on the Waaagh field mechanics, treatises on Gork and Mork's nature, explorations of consciousness and collective existence. All the weird, thinky stuff that most Orks ignored, but some Orks desperately needed. On the day we opened it, 23 Orks showed up. Not many, but it was a start. I gave a speech, awkward rambling, full of technical jargon, about the importance of understanding alongside instinct, about combining Orky nature with Orky knowledge. We're not humies, I concluded. We don't fear death, so we don't need to understand it to overcome fear. We understand it to use it, to make our deaths count for more, to ensure every Ork who falls adds maximum value to the eternal Waaagh. That's the purpose of this repository. That's the purpose of all this teaching. Not to change what we are, but to perfect what we've always been. The applause was nth. The applause was enthusiastic if brief. Orcs don't do long ceremonies. But I saw the understanding in their eyes, saw that they got it, saw that the weird philosophical orcs finally had a home, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that my work would outlive me, would continue after I died, would become part of the eternal orc knowledge that guided every generation forward. That was enough. That was everything. That was exactly what I'd spent my life working toward. The teaching wasn't just about death anymore. It was about life, about purpose, about being the best possible orc you could be in whatever time you had, about contributing to something infinitely larger than yourself while remaining absolutely, perfectly, individually orky. And every student who understood that truth became a teacher themselves, became part of the spreading network of knowledge that would eventually touch every curious orc in the galaxy. The Waaagh wasn't just eternal, it was evolving, growing smarter, becoming more than simple violence, transforming into something the old ones probably never anticipated but would definitely approve of. We were still orcs, still brutal, still violent, still obsessed with fighting, but now we knew why, and that made all the difference. Chapter 8. The Green Forever. 20 years after I started my research, I was dying. Properly dying this time. Not the temporary kind that pain boys could fix. My body was worn out, too many injuries, too many bionic replacements, too many years of hard living. I was 93 years old, which was absurdly ancient for an orc. Had outlived Bloodrock, outlived Zagrot, outlived most of the orcs I'd ever known. But I'd finished my work, had documented everything, had taught enough students that the knowledge would survive, had written it all down in a massive tome that covered 300 pages of scrap metal sheets, all bolted together with my finest welding work. Every orc who wanted to understand death could read it now, so I'd chosen my moment, chosen my place, chosen to let go. I was on Octarius, where I'd spawned 93 years ago. Full circle, proper ending. The war here was eternal. Orcs versus Tyranids. Endless grinding battle that had raged for decades. Perfect place to die. Perfect fight to join. Figwort was with me. He'd become my best student, then my partner, then my successor. He'd continue the research after I was gone, would teach the next generation, would keep refining the understanding. "You don't have to do this," he said, checking my vitals on a looted Imperial medical scanner. "I could get a pain boy, could patch you up for another few years." "Nah," I said, watching the battle rage in the valley below us. Thousands of orcs charging Tyranid positions, dying gloriously, feeding the Waaagh with every death. "I'm done, finished my purpose. Time to see if I'm right about what comes next." He laughed nervously. "What if you're wrong? What if there's nothing? Then I won't know I was wrong, will I? But I'm not wrong. I've measured it too many times, watched too many deaths, felt the field too clearly." I looked at him. "You'll measure mine, yeah? Get good data, add it to the research." "Course I will." He was crying, which was unusual for an orc. We didn't usually cry, but Figwort was always a bit odd, like me. "You were a good teacher, Grotnik. You were a good student." I could feel the Waaagh field opening around me, ready to receive me. Could feel Grakka in there, and Bloodrock, and Zagrot, and thousands of others I'd known. Could feel millions I'd never met, but who were waiting anyway. "Take care of the tome. Make sure every orc who asks gets to read it." "I will, I promise." The pain was getting bad now. My heart was struggling, lungs barely working, body shutting down system by system. Should have been terrifying. Wasn't. Was actually kind of pleasant, like finally putting down a heavy burden after carrying it for decades. I closed my eyes and felt the Waaagh field properly. Really felt it, with all the sensitivity I'd developed over 20 years of study. It was beautiful, massive beyond comprehension, green and vibrant and absolutely alive with fighting spirit. Every orc who'd ever lived was in there somewhere. Their experiences and knowledge and courage all woven together into something greater than the sum of its parts. And Gork and Mork were at the center, always fighting, always arguing, always demonstrating the perfect balance between brutal cunning and cunning brutality. They weren't distant gods demanding worship. They were us, amplified to divine scale, the accumulated essence of every orc, conscious and active and engaged. "I can see them," I whispered. "Can see the green fields. They're real, Figwort." I was right. "It's all real. I believe you," he said. The material world was fading, the sounds of battle growing distant. My body no longer hurt because I was barely connected to it anymore. Just a thin thread, easily broken. I saw other orcs around me, dead ones. Grakka was there, looking younger and more savage than I remembered. Bloodrock too, his mega armor pristine and undamaged. Zagrot was there, laughing like a maniac, eyes blazing with psychic power. Dozens of others, hundreds, all waiting to welcome me home. Took you long enough, you git, Grakka said, grinning. We've been waiting to hear your theories in person. Got some arguments to settle about consciousness and death, I laughed. Of course the dead were still arguing about my research. Of course they'd been paying attention. They were always paying attention. One question first, I said to Grakka. When you died, that moment when the Carnifex took your head, were you really laughing? Of course I was laughing. Best death ever. Went out fighting the biggest git on the battlefield. He clapped me on the shoulder, and I could feel it despite not having a physical body anymore. And then I got here and found out the fighting never stops. Couldn't ask for better. The thread connecting me to my material body snapped. Didn't hurt. Felt like relief. Like finally coming home after a long deployment. My consciousness exploded outward into the Waaagh field. Suddenly, I wasn't just Grotnik anymore. I was every orc. Could feel what they felt, know what they knew, fight how they fought. My individual memories were still there, but they were drops of water merging into an ocean. Still distinct if you looked close, but part of something infinitely larger. And the fighting. Oh, the fighting. The green fields stretched forever in every direction. Rolling hills covered in the greenest grass I'd ever seen, under a sun that blazed with emerald light. And everywhere, orcs were fighting. Not killing each other permanently, just scrapping endlessly. You get knocked down, you get back up, you charge back in. Perfect combat with no stakes except pride and joy. Gork and Mork were visible on the horizon, so massive they made mountains look like pebbles. They were wrestling, or maybe fighting, or maybe both. Their argument shook the earth beneath my feet, but it was a good shaking, an exciting shaking, the kind that made you want to join in. So what do you think? Bloodrock appeared beside me, looking exactly as he had in his prime. Meet your expectations? Exceeds them, I admitted. I don't have words. Course you don't. Words are for the material world. Here we just feel, he gestured at the endless battle. You can fight if you want. Most orcs do nothing else. Or you can watch, help the living, guide the new arrivals. Lots of options. I could feel the pull to fight. Every orc instinct I had was screaming at me to jump into the nearest scrap. But I could also feel the living orcs back in the material world. Could feel Figwort measuring my death signature. Could feel the students I'd taught, using my knowledge to fight smarter. Could feel orcs across the galaxy who were reading my tome, learning about death, losing their fear. I want to help the living, I said, at least for a while. They're still learning, still figuring it out, Grakka nodded approvingly. Good choice. The fighting here is eternal, it'll wait, but the living need guidance now. Especially the weird gits like you who think too much. So that became my role in the afterlife. Fighting sometimes, yes. Couldn't resist jumping into a good scrap now and then. But mostly I watched the living, guided them when I could, shared my knowledge through the Waaagh field, helped young mechs understand technology, helped curious orcs understand death, helped everyone fight better, live better, die better. And I wasn't alone. Millions of other dead orcs were doing the same thing, each contributing their expertise, each making the living stronger, each proving that death wasn't the end of usefulness, just a change in how you served the Waaagh. From this perspective, I could see the full scope of what the old ones had created. We weren't just warriors, we were a species-wide consciousness that transcended death. Every orc that had ever lived was still contributing to every orc currently alive. The dead outnumbered the living by millions to one, and we were all still active, still engaged, still fighting. The Humies feared death because they saw it as separation from life. The Eldar feared it because their souls could be tortured by chaos. The Tau didn't even believe in an afterlife. But orcs? We'd achieved something none of them had. True continuity across death. We were literally immortal as a species because our consciousness never ended, just changed forms. I watched Figwort continue my research, watched him teach new students, watched the understanding spread through orc society like a slow green wave. Some orcs rejected it, preferred instinct to knowledge, but the curious ones, the philosophical ones, the thinking ones absorbed it eagerly. And I watched them die, one by one, my students. Watched them cross over into the green fields, welcomed each one personally, showed them around. introduced them to Grakka and Bludruk and all the others, built a whole community of dead intellectuals who spent their time helping living intellectuals understand the universe better. Even in death, we were learning, growing, evolving. The Waaagh field wasn't static, it changed with each new edition. Every orc who died brought new experiences, new knowledge, new perspectives. The collective consciousness was constantly expanding, becoming more complex, more capable. I saw the truth that even my decades of research hadn't fully grasped. The orcs were becoming something beyond what the old ones had designed. We'd started as weapons, but we were evolving into something else, something that used fighting as a language, but was capable of so much more. Maybe that's what Gork and Mork's argument was really about. Not tactics or methods, but the future of the species. Gork wanted us to stay pure warriors, simple and brutal. Mork wanted us to develop cunning, intelligence, complexity, and their eternal argument kept us balanced between the two extremes. Neither was winning. Neither would ever win. And that was perfect. That was exactly what we needed. Time worked differently in the green fields. Could have been years or centuries watching the living. Didn't matter. Time was a material world concept. Here, there was only the eternal present, the eternal fight, the eternal Waaagh. But I noticed something eventually. The living orcs were getting stronger. Not physically. Physically, they were the same as always. But psychically, they were developing. More weird boys were surviving their powers instead of exploding. More orcs were consciously accessing the Waaagh field instead of just unconsciously using it. The species was awakening to its own potential. Maybe my research had contributed to that. Maybe not. Hard to say, but I like to think that teaching orcs to understand death had helped them understand life too. Helped them see themselves as part of something greater. Helped them fight not just from instinct, but from knowledge. You change things, Zagrot told me one day. Or what passed for a day in the green fields. Made orcs think about thinking. That's dangerous and brilliant. Is it better? I asked. Are we better for understanding? He shrugged, psychic energy crackling around him. We're different. Whether that's better depends on who you ask. Gork thinks understanding makes us weak. Mork thinks understanding makes us strong. They're still arguing about it, I laughed. They'll be arguing about it forever. That's the point you get. The argument is the answer. He was right. The tension between brutal simplicity and cunning complexity was what made orcs perfect. We didn't need to resolve it. Needed to maintain it. Needed both impulses pulling at us constantly, keeping us balanced, keeping us orky. I could feel my individual consciousness fading slowly. Not dying. Couldn't die here, but merging more fully with the collective. My memories were dispersing into the general knowledge base. My personality was blending with millions of others. In a few more centuries, there wouldn't be a distinct Grotnik anymore. Just another thread in the vast green tapestry. And that was fine. Better than fine. That was exactly what should happen. But before I faded completely, I wanted to leave one final message, one last piece of knowledge for the living orcs who'd read my tome and wondered if I'd been right. I reached through the Waaagh field, found Figwort, now an old orc himself, still teaching, still researching, and pushed one final thought through to him. I was right. About all of it. Death is just another kind of fighting. The green fields are real. Gork and Mork are real. The ancestors are real and present and helping every moment. Don't fear death. Don't avoid it. But don't rush toward it either. Live your purpose first. Fight your fights. Teach what you know. And when it's time, let go laughing. We'll be waiting. Figwort felt the message. Felt my presence. Started crying again, the odd git. But he smiled too. Smiled because he understood. Smiled because all his questions were answered. Smiled because he knew exactly where he was going when his time came. And that was the point of everything I'd done. Not to make orcs fearless. They were already fearless. But to make them conscious of why they were fearless. To turn instinct into knowledge. To transform blind faith into certain understanding. The Humies would spend another 10,000 years wondering if their emperor could hear them. If their sacrifices mattered. If their deaths meant anything. They'd die afraid. Uncertain. Hoping but never knowing. But every orc who read my tome would die knowing. Would die certain. Would die aware that they were joining something eternal and beautiful and absolutely real. That was my legacy. Not technology or tactical victories or grand achievements. Just knowledge. Just truth. Just the simple fact that death wasn't the end. My consciousness merged fully with the collective then. Grotnik. The individual faded into Grotnik, the eternal. Part of the vast green consciousness that powered every living orc. my research became everyone's research. My understanding became everyone's understanding. My certainty became everyone's certainty. And somewhere in the material world, a young orc spawned from the fungus beds with a strange curiosity about death, with an odd compulsion to study what others took for granted, with my intellectual DNA coded into his genes, ready to continue the work I'd started. Because that's how orcs achieve immortality, not through individual persistence, but through eternal recurrence. The same ideas, the same questions, the same discoveries, happening over and over across generations, each time adding something new, each time pushing the species a bit further toward understanding. The Waaagh was eternal, the fighting was eternal, the questions were eternal, and now, thanks to decades of research by a weird mech who couldn't stop wondering, the answers were eternal too. Death wasn't the end for orcs. It was just coming home, just joining the biggest, best, most eternal fight in the universe. Just becoming part of something so vast and beautiful and brutal that even 10,000 years of war couldn't diminish it. We were orcs. We fought. We died. We fought some more. Forever. Always. In the green fields and the material world and everywhere between. And we did it all laughing because we knew the truth that every other species in the galaxy was desperately seeking. There is no death. There is only Waaagh, and the Waaagh is eternal. The decades passed in the green fields, or maybe centuries, time being the fluid thing it was here. And I watched the orc species evolve in ways I'd never anticipated during my living years. My consciousness had merged with the collective. Yes, but enough of Grotnik remained to observe, to analyze, to continue the research that had defined my material existence. I discovered something the living could never fully understand. The dead weren't passive observers. We were active architects of orc destiny. Every time a war boss made a crucial tactical decision, thousands of dead generals were whispering suggestions through the Waaagh field. Every time a mech solved an impossible engineering problem, millions of dead technicians were sharing their accumulated knowledge. Every time a young boy survived his first battle through some miraculous instinct, it was because 10,000 dead warriors guided his movements. The living thought they were making their own choices. They were, in a sense, but those choices were informed by the entire history of the orc species flowing through them constantly. Free will and ancestral guidance weren't opposites. They were the same thing viewed from different angles. I found Bloodrock one day, or what passed for a day, watching a massive battle in the material world. His consciousness was focused on a young warboss leading a Waaagh against a Necron tomb world. The boy was making mistakes, overextending his forces, leaving flanks vulnerable. "Why don't you help him?" I asked, settling in beside my old warboss. "I am helping," Bloodrock rumbled. "Been pushing tactical knowledge at him for 3 days, but he's young, confident, thinks he knows better than the ancestors." He paused. "He'll learn, either by listening or by dying. Either way, the Waaagh continues." I watched the young warboss charge directly into a Necron kill zone, watched half his mob get vaporized by Gorse weapons, watched him roar in fury and finally feel the Waaagh field properly, felt him open himself to the ancestral knowledge. Bloodrock's tactical expertise flooded into the boy, along with knowledge from 36 other dead warbosses. The young orc's eyes widened. He immediately changed tactics, pulled back, reorganized, hit the Necrons from an unexpected angle, turned a disastrous charge into a crushing victory. "See?" Bloodrock said with satisfaction. "He learned. He'll listen better next time. And when he dies, he'll join us and help teach the next generation." That was the cycle, the eternal teaching machine. Every orc that lived added their experiences to the collective. Every orc that died became a teacher for those still fighting. The species accumulated knowledge across millennia without losing any of it to death or time. The Humies had libraries that burned, records that were lost, knowledge that disappeared when scholars died. The Eldar hoarded information in craft worlds and webway archives, accessible only to the few. But orcs? Our library was the Waaagh field itself, available to every greenskin who learned to listen. Democratic, eternal, indestructible. I started spending time with other dead researchers. Turned out I wasn't the first orc to study death, just the first to document it so thoroughly. There was a whole community of philosophical orcs in the green fields, spanning thousands of years of history, learned from an ancient mech named Nazdreg, who died 3,000 years before I was spawned. He'd studied the relationship between belief and reality, discovered that orcs literally shaped the warp through collective conviction. His research explained why red vehicles went faster, why big shooters shot further when an orc believed they would, why the impossible happened regularly around orcs. We're reality editors, Nasdreg explained, his ancient consciousness still sharp despite millennia of existence. The old ones designed us to fight chaos by imposing our own logic on the warp. Human logic says guns need bullets and physics and maintenance. Orc logic says guns just need shooting and belief. And our belief is so strong, so unified through the Waaagh field, that reality bends to accommodate us. So death is just another belief? I asked. We don't fear it because we believe the green fields exist, and our belief makes them real. Nah, you get, he laughed, a sound like grinding gears. The green fields existed before we believed in them. The old ones built them into us, but our belief shapes what they're like. Millions of orcs believing in eternal combat made the green fields into eternal combat. If we believed in eternal poetry, they'd be fields of poetry. But we're orcs, so we believe in fighting, so that's what we get. It was a profound realization. The afterlife wasn't imposed on us from outside. We created it collectively through our shared expectations. And because every orc expected the same thing, endless glorious combat, that's exactly what manifested. The Humies couldn't achieve this because they didn't agree on anything. Every faction, every planet, every individual had different beliefs about the afterlife. So their souls scattered across the warp, each finding what they expected, or being devoured by whatever was strongest. No unity, no collective protection, but orcs were unified at the genetic level. We all expected the same afterlife because it was coded into our very existence. And that collective expectation created an impenetrable fortress in the warp that no chaos god could breach. I met dead weird boys who'd studied the chaos gods from this safe vantage point, learned that the ruinous powers were terrified of orcs in a way they weren't terrified of any other species. We're immune to their usual tricks, explained a dead weird boy named Morgish, who'd spent his living years fighting demonic incursions. They can't tempt us with power, we already have the Waaagh. Can't tempt us with pleasure, we get that from fighting. Can't tempt us with hope or despair, we don't feel either. We just fight, die, and fight some more. They can't corrupt that. What about the Chaos Orcs? I asked. The ones who worship the dark gods? Morgish spat, a psychic expression of disgust. Broken orcs. Damaged ones who had their connection to the Waaagh severed somehow, usually torture or extended isolation. Break an orc's connection to his culture, to his fellows, to the Waaagh field, and he becomes vulnerable. That's when chaos can creep in, but it requires breaking the orc first. We don't fall naturally. That explains so much. The chaos orcs I'd seen during my living years had all been isolated, tortured, broken individuals, separated from proper orc society long enough for their genetic connection to weaken. They weren't choosing chaos over the Waaagh. They were desperately grabbing at any psychic anchor after losing their natural one. I shared this knowledge with the living through the Waaagh field, pushed it toward warbosses who might face chaos corruption, toward weird boys who needed to recognize the signs, toward any orc who might wonder why some of their fellows turned traitor. And I felt the knowledge take root, felt living orcs understand better, felt them recognize isolation as a danger and respond by keeping their mobs closer, their bonds stronger. The dead teaching the living to survive better, but the most profound discovery came when I encountered the oldest consciousness in the green fields, an orc so ancient he claimed to remember. The war in heaven itself. His name was Erlak, and he was more concept than individual at this point. His consciousness had merged so fully with the Waaagh that separating him from it was nearly impossible. But he could still communicate with younger dead like me. You want to know the real secret? Erlak's voice was like continents grinding together. Why the old ones made us the way they are? Yeah, I said, my research instincts flaring despite being dead for decades or centuries. Because they knew they couldn't win the war in heaven. Couldn't beat the Cetan and Necrons with conventional weapons. So they made us as their final weapon. Not a weapon to win the war, a weapon to outlast everyone else. He showed me memories, or genetic impressions of memories, from the war in heaven. The old ones creating the orcs as fungal warriors who could spread across any world, survive any condition, fight any enemy, but more importantly, who could never truly be exterminated. Every other species has extinction conditions, Erlak explained. Kill all the Humies, humanity ends. Destroy all the Elder Craft worlds and Maiden worlds, the Elder end. But orcs were everywhere. On every world that's ever seen a battle, in the cracks and shadows and forgotten places. They can kill billions of us, and we just grow back from the spores. Can't be stopped, can't be ended, can't be removed from the galaxy. So we're, what, a galactic infection? We're immortality. His ancient consciousness pressed the truth into mine. The old ones are gone. The Cetan are shattered. The Necrons sleep. The Eldar are dying. The Humies will eventually fall. But orcs? Orcs will be here when the last star burns out. We'll be fighting in the dark between dead galaxies. We'll exist as long as the concept of violence exists. We're the universe's eternal constant. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. The orcs weren't just a species. We were a fundamental force of nature, like gravity or entropy. Always present, always operating, always inevitable. And death didn't end our participation in that force. It just changed how we contributed. The living fought in the material world. The dead fought in the psychic realm. Both were necessary. Both were eternal. I thought about the Humie Emperor and his Imperium. 10,000 years of struggle to maintain a dying empire. All that effort just to delay the inevitable extinction. They knew they were dying, spent every day fighting against the slow fade into oblivion. But orcs didn't have that anxiety. Didn't need to worry about species survival because our survival was guaranteed by our very nature. We couldn't go extinct, could only transform, spread, evolve, continue. That's why you don't fear death, Erlach said, reading my thoughts. Not just because the green fields exist, but because death is just another form of species continuity. You die, your knowledge feeds the next generation. They die, their knowledge feeds the next. Endless cycle, endless persistence. We're designed to never end. I spent the next period. Time was meaningless here, but if I had to guess, maybe 50 years, studying the mechanics of knowledge transfer. How did information flow from dead to living? What determined which knowledge reached which orc? Discovered it was based on need and compatibility. A mech working on a problem would naturally draw on dead mechs who'd solved similar problems. A warboss facing a tactical challenge would pull tactical knowledge from appropriate ancestors. The Waaagh field automatically routed information to where it was needed most. It was the most efficient education system imaginable. No schools, no teachers, no formal instruction. Just instant knowledge transfer from those who knew to those who needed to know. Faster than any library. More comprehensive than any database. All biological, all psychic, all automatic. But it wasn't perfect. Sometimes knowledge got lost in translation. Sometimes living orcs were too stubborn to hear the ancestors. Sometimes the wrong knowledge reached the wrong orc at the wrong time. I started working on improving the system. Found other dead researchers who shared my interest. We formed something like a committee. Ridiculous concept for orcs. But we were already dead, so normal rules didn't apply to optimize knowledge transfer. The problem, explained a dead blood axe named Scarfang, who'd studied Humie tactics for 60 years before dying, is that living orcs don't know they're receiving ancestral knowledge. They think it's instinct or intuition, so they don't value it properly, don't listen carefully enough. So we need to make them more aware? I asked. Exactly. Your research during life helped with that. More orcs understanding the Waaagh field means more orcs consciously accessing it. We need to continue that education, make every orc aware they're connected to billions of ancestors who want to help. It became my new purpose. My afterlife work, teaching the living to listen to the dead. Not through direct communication, that was only possible for weird boys and near-death experiences, but through the Waaagh field itself. I'd push feelings of certainty toward orcs who were accessing ancestral knowledge. Make them aware that the sudden insight they just had came from somewhere. Make them curious about the source. That curiosity would lead to questions. Questions would lead to research. Research would lead to understanding. Slow process. Multi-generational. But I had eternity, and I started seeing results. More young orcs were asking questions about the Waaagh field. More mechs were consciously trying to access dead knowledge. More warbosses were deliberately opening themselves to ancestral tactical advice before making crucial decisions. The living orcs were becoming more sophisticated without losing their brutal essence. They were learning to combine instinct with knowledge, violence with wisdom, individual courage with collective support. Watched a young orc named Kazkul rise to prominence. He was different from other warbosses. More strategic, more patient, more willing to learn from the past. Turned out he'd been touched by Gork and Mork directly, had received so much ancestral knowledge in a single vision that it fundamentally changed him. He's the future, Blue Drock said. watching Ghazghkull unite orc clans that had been fighting each other for centuries. The kind of warboss who can access the full weight of our history. Who can lead with the wisdom of every warboss who ever lived, I agreed. Ghazghkull was proof that my research had purpose. That teaching orcs to understand death and the Waaagh field created better leaders, better fighters, better orcs. But more importantly, I realized that I was watching the orc species evolve in real time. We weren't static, weren't locked into the design the old ones had given us. We were developing, growing, becoming something new while retaining everything that made us orky. Maybe in another 10,000 years, every orc would be like Ghazghkull, consciously connected to the ancestors, deliberately drawing on millennia of accumulated wisdom, fighting not just from instinct, but from informed choice. Or maybe not. Maybe the brutal simplicity of most orcs was necessary. Maybe having some orcs who just fought without thinking provided a valuable contrast to the sophisticated ones. The eternal argument between Gork and Mork again. Brutality versus cunning. Simplicity versus complexity. Both necessary. Both valuable. Both orky. I felt my individual consciousness fading further. The edges of Grotnik were blurring into the collective more each day, or year, or century. Soon there wouldn't be enough of me left to have these thoughts. I'd be fully merged, fully part of the eternal Waaagh. And that was fine, better than fine, because I'd accomplished what I set out to do, had studied death, had documented it, had taught others, had continued the work even after dying, had contributed to the eternal project of making orcs better, stronger, more aware of their own potential. My individual story was ending, but my contribution would never end, would echo through every orc who read my tome, through every student who learned from my teachings, through every researcher who built on my foundation. That was true immortality. Not persistence of self, but persistence of purpose. Not living forever, but mattering forever. The Humies built monuments to remember their dead. The Eldar sang songs of their fallen. The Tau recorded their heroes in historical databases. But Orks did something better. We made our dead part of the living. Made them active, present, contributing members of society who just happened to exist in a different form. Our monuments weren't stone or song or data. They were the continuous improvement of every orc who ever lived. Compound interest on 10 million years of accumulated experience. I saw Figwort die finally, after a long and productive life of research and teaching, watched his consciousness cross over into the green fields, welcomed him personally, along with Grakka and Bloodrock and all the others he'd known in life. "You were right about everything," he said, looking around at the eternal battle with wonder. "It's exactly as you described." Of course I was right. I'm a researcher. Being right is what I do, he laughed. Started asking questions immediately, even in death. That was the student I'd trained. Never satisfied, always curious, always pushing for deeper understanding. I introduced him to Nazdreg and Erlak and the other ancient researchers, showed him the projects we were working on, the systems we were developing to better transfer knowledge to the living, the studies we were conducting on Waaagh field mechanics. "There's still so much to learn," Figwort said with delight. "Even death doesn't end the research." "Nothing ends the research," I told him. "That's the point. We just keep discovering, keep teaching, keep improving, forever." And that was the final truth I'd learned about orc death and the afterlife. It wasn't an ending or even a transition. It was a continuation, a change in form but not in function. You kept being yourself, kept pursuing your purpose, kept contributing to the Waaagh. You just did it from a different battlefield. The green field stretched forever around us. Gork and Mork were still arguing on the horizon, their eternal battle shaking the earth. Millions of orcs were still fighting, dying, respawning, fighting again, and billions more were helping the living, teaching the young, guiding the next generation toward greater understanding. There was no death in the orc species, only transformation, only eternal persistence through changing forms, only the certainty that every orc who'd ever lived was still part of the fight, would always be part of the fight, could never be separated from the fight. We were orcs. We fought. We died. We fought some more. Forever. And now, thanks to decades of research by one weird mech who couldn't stop asking questions, we knew exactly why. Knew exactly how. Knew exactly what came next. The Humies could keep their uncertainty and fear. The Eldar could keep their terror of she who thirsts. The Tau could keep their naive materialism. We orcs had something better. We had the truth. Simple, brutal, beautiful truth. Death is just another kind of fighting. The green fields are real. The ancestors never leave, and the Waaagh is eternal. That was all any orc needed to know. Everything else was just details.